Have you ever dreamed of living in a medieval castle? Grand balls, epic sword fights, knights in shining armor, and maybe even a dragon or two? Well, Hollywood has painted a pretty picture, but the reality was a bit different. Let's dive into what life in a medieval castle was really like and bust some popular myths along the way. First, let's talk about the castle itself. Movies show these majestic, clean, and spacious stone fortresses. But in reality, castles were primarily military structures. They were built for defense, not comfort. Think less fairy tale palace and more heavily fortified bunker. The walls were thick, the windows were tiny arrow slits designed to shoot from, not to let in sunlight. This made the interiors dark, damp, and incredibly cold, especially during winter. Forget central heating. The main source of warmth was a massive open fireplace in the Great Hall. While it looked impressive, it was horribly inefficient. Most of the heat went straight up the chimney, leaving the rest of the room smoky and drafty. People would huddle close to the fire, but step a few feet away, and you'd be freezing again. So, what about those grand feasts we always see? Tables groaning with roasted swans, mountains of fruit, and endless goblets of wine. While lords and ladies did enjoy lavish banquets on special occasions, the daily diet was far more monotonous. For the wealthy, it consisted of a lot of meat and bread. But for the hundreds of servants, soldiers, and artisans living in the castle, their meals were mostly pottage, a thick stew of grains, and whatever vegetables were available, along with dark, coarse bread and weak ale. Fresh fruit and vegetables were seasonal and often a luxury. And that crystal clear water? Nope. Water was often contaminated, so most people, including children, drank ale or beer because the brewing process killed off harmful bacteria. Now, let's address the smell. Hollywood films rarely capture this, but medieval castles were smelly. Really smelly. With hundreds of people and animals, horses, dogs, chickens, all living in close quarters, the smells would have been overwhelming. And what about sanitation? Toilets, or garderobes, as they were called, were basically a stone or wooden seat over a chute that emptied directly outside the castle walls, often into the moat. Imagine the smell of that on a hot summer day. Personal hygiene was also a far cry from our modern standards. While people did wash, a full bath was a rare and complicated event. Hot water had to be heated over a fire and carried in buckets to a wooden tub. For most, a quick wash of the hands and face with cold water was the daily routine. What about the social life? Was it all romance and chivalry? Knights in shining armor are a staple of medieval movies. While the code of chivalry was a real ideal, the reality was often much grittier. Knights were professional soldiers. Their armor wasn't always shiny. It was functional, heavy, and required constant maintenance to prevent rust. It could weigh over 50 pounds, making movement difficult and exhausting, and those epic one-on-one duels for a lady's honor? While tournaments existed, actual battlefield combat was chaotic, brutal, and anything but glamorous. And what about the ladies of the castle? They weren't just damsels in distress waiting to be rescued. A noblewoman, especially the lady of the castle, had immense responsibilities. When her husband was away at war, which was often, she was in charge of managing the entire castle. This meant overseeing the household, managing supplies, handling finances, and even commanding the defense of the castle during a siege. They were powerful figures, far from the passive princesses we see in films. The Great Hall was the heart of the castle, but it wasn't the quiet, stately room of the movies. It was a bustling, noisy, and crowded public space. It served as the dining room, the courtroom, the office, and even the sleeping quarters for many of the household servants, who would just roll out a straw mattress on the floor at night. Privacy was a concept that simply didn't exist for most people. Even the lord and lady's bedchamber was not entirely private, as personal attendants often slept in the same room. And let's not forget the constant threat of disease. With poor sanitation, limited medical knowledge, and crowded living conditions, disease could spread like wildfire. A simple cut could become infected and lead to death. The Black Death in the 14th century wiped out a huge portion of Europe's population, and castles offered little protection from such an invisible enemy. Life was fragile, and the average life expectancy was much lower than it is today. So while Hollywood gives us a romantic and exciting version of castle life, the reality was a tough, smelly, cold, and often uncomfortable existence, governed by strict social hierarchies and the constant need for defense. It was a world of stark contrasts of incredible craftsmanship and art alongside brutal warfare and hardship. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was a fascinating and complex world that shaped the course of history. The real stories of the people who lived and died within those stone walls are, in many ways, more compelling than any fantasy Hollywood could dream up. Thanks for watching. If you found this glimpse into real castle life interesting, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next historical deep dive. See you next time.